When selling a house, if a death occurred within 3 years of the house going on the market, the seller is required to inform potential buyers of said death. This little requirement wasn't necessary in my case. Everyone within a 50-mile radius seemed to know about Victoria Teller. It was a tragic story. She had given birth to a bouncing baby boy, whose father no one seemed to know. The baby passed away just a few months later, and Victoria took her own life a year after that. That much was known to be true. What was unknown were the circumstances surrounding the incident, how the baby died. Some said accident, some said illness, others said murder. The circumstances surrounding how Victoria killed herself and what happened in between remain ominous. The popular rumor was that Victoria, in her grief-stricken psychosis, began buying dolls to replace her dearly departed son. The doll would then suffer the same fate as the real baby in her mind, and she would bury it and move on to another. People, mostly teenagers, made it a Halloween tradition to search for the doll graveyard. They searched the backyard and the woods behind it, but nothing was found in the 6 years that the house was empty. I was confident that the house that I had bought for my family and me had nothing strange in its history but 2 tragic deaths. The first few months living in the Teller house were uneventful. I had to occasionally shoo away curious locals that weren't aware that our house was no longer empty, but I found no ghosts or satanic symbols or anything of the like. It seemed that it was just a house, one that I got a huge discount on because of what happened there and the bad juju it was rumored to have acquired because of it. By the time the Christmas season rolled around, I had pretty much forgotten about Victoria Teller. It was the first year that my son Caleb was really aware of anything other than presents. We lined the roof and windows with lights, hung a wreath on the door, and put some standing decorations on the lawn. We bought and decorated a tree big enough to fit a toy store underneath, which was appropriate because of how many presents Santa was going to bring Caleb that year. He was getting more excited each day, especially since we had been dropping hints that he was getting a puppy. My family was the happiest it had ever been, until a week before Christmas. My wife had been wrapping presents as we bought them so that we didn't have to stay up all night on Christmas Eve like we had in previous years. She had opened the door to the closet that held the presents to find the wrapping paper torn to shreds. Her first thought was that Caleb had gotten into them, but I doubted that he would be able to contain his excitement if he had. It looked almost as if some sort of rodents had shredded the paper, but the boxes weren't damaged at all. We brushed it off as a mystery and moved the presents to the attic after rewrapping them. I occasionally heard some shuffling from inside the closet, but I never saw whatever critter had caused it. I figured I would call an exterminator after Christmas to check inside the walls. Soon, things started to get really strange. I walked into the bathroom to find the dirty clothes scattered around the room and the hamper on its side. My wife found the refrigerator door hanging open, with food torn up and thrown on the floor. Caleb was distraught one morning when he woke up to find all of the toys that he had carefully placed in his toy box the night before had been thrown all around his room while he was asleep. All this and the noises in the walls were getting more frequent and were heard everywhere in the house. My superstitious wife was becoming scared that the local urban legend was true. That Victoria Teller still haunted the house. She reasoned that the spirit was becoming more active because we were so happily preparing for the holiday with our son, something she never got to do. I laughed at her theory, although I shouldn't have. Christmas Eve, my wife and I put Caleb to bed. We had to return in his room several times to tell him that if he didn't go to sleep, Santa wouldn't be bringing anything. When I was convinced that he was finally going to stay in his room, I picked the puppy up from my mother's house and brought it home. We hadn't named him yet, but he was a golden retriever puppy that was as energetic as he was soft and fluffy. After playing with him for a while, we put him to bed in his crate, ate the cookies Caleb left for Santa, and turned in for the night. I was jerked from my slumber by a blood-curdling scream. My wife and I followed our son's cries for help to the living room. Caleb had snuck out of bed and found the puppy. Instead of that fluffy ball that we had left by the tree, he found a mangled metal crate filled and surrounded by fur, blood, and chunks of discarded meat. My wife took Caleb into another room to console him while I checked for intruders and signs of a break-in. I found nothing, so I returned to the living room and began cleaning up the mess. I was kneeling on the floor, convincing myself that there was a silver lining in the fact that we had hardwood floors instead of carpet, when I heard a tinkling noise come from the tree. I turned my head just in time to see a pair of big blue eyes staring at me from the branches. I jumped to my feet and backed up a few paces just as the first doll dropped from the tree. It was followed by 3 others. They were those delicate porcelain dolls, wearing what were probably pretty little dresses at one time. I couldn't tell, because the dresses were covered in dirt and blood. I watched with a mixture of terror and disbelief as all 4 dolls slowly rose from the ground and started toward me. The screams of my wife and son snapped me out of my horrified trance. The dolls' heads turned as I ran from the room to find my family. I raced up the stairs to my bedroom, where I found my wife standing on our bed with Caleb in her arms. Dozens of porcelain dolls, varying in states of damage and filth, were standing on the floor surrounding the bed. They were making their way toward my loved ones, with their tiny arms stretched out, reaching for the woman and child who were desperately trying to stay away. I started kicking the little demons out of the way as I hurried to the rescue of my wife and child. I didn't think a bunch of fucking dolls would be so hard to push through, but I was wrong. For every one that I kicked away, 4 more came at me. They grabbed and pulled and thrashed and bit, and I found myself moving away from the bed instead of toward it. After noticing that most of the dolls had directed their attention to me, I yelled for my wife to run. I hoped that I served as enough of a distraction for the demon toys that her and Caleb could get away unharmed. The dolls that were still trying to reach them were clinging to the sides of the bed, climbing with delicate little hands. My wife jumped off the bed, stumbled and fell. Caleb's head hit the floor, and the resulting cries caught the attention of many of the dolls I was desperately trying to fight off and keep away. My wife tried to right herself and gather our son before the wave of small monsters got to them, but she was too slow. I watched as the dolls quickly swarmed Caleb and began tearing at his flesh. My wife was trying to get them away, but they turned on her when Caleb stopped thrashing. I made my way to them just as my wife stopped fighting. I saw the despair in her eyes as a doll with black hair and a gray tattered dress bit a chunk from her throat. The creatures moved so fast. There were so many of them. We didn't stand a chance. I don't know how long I stood in my bedroom, watching a horde of dolls ripping apart the 2 people I loved most in the world, before I realized that I was no longer being attacked. Every porcelain creature was crowded around what was left of my wife and son, feasting on them. I've regretted what I did next every day since. I ran. I bounded down the steps as fast as my feet would carry me. I reached the front door when I heard a woman's voice come from the 2nd floor.
"That's right, my children. Fill those bellies so you can grow big and strong."
I shut the door behind me and fell down the steps of the front porch. After vomiting up the cookies I had eaten earlier that night, I turned to look at the house. Peeking out of the window, illuminated by the colorful Christmas lights, was a gaunt woman wearing a tattered black dress. She smiled through a veil of stringy hair as the doll climbed up the front of her dress and into her arms. Then she closed the curtain. Number 2. Last year on Boxing Day, I found a really cool ornament in a clearance box. It had a built-in camera to record unique perspectives on your holiday celebrations. I grabbed the last one from the store's dusty shelf and brought it home for less than $10. I forgot about it until my wife, my 2 daughters, and I decorated the house earlier this month. I told my daughters about the camera and said we'd secretly catch Santa in the act. I had an old costume in the attic and intended to deliver some gifts in full view of the camera on Christmas night. My girls were overjoyed and went back and forth trying to find the best place to put the ornament on the tree. They had no idea Daddy repositioned it later so it could catch the living room at a good angle. In the nights leading up to Christmas, I turned the camera on to make sure everything was working properly. In the morning, I previewed the footage, just long enough to confirm the thing was working. Satisfied, I inserted the micro SD card back into the ornament, and slipped in a new battery in anticipation for the big night. Daddy didn't want to disappoint his girls with a failed recording. We enjoyed Christmas Eve as a family, playing board games and eating way more junk food than there was room in our stomachs for. Like we do every year, we let our daughters open one gift from Mommy and Daddy before going to bed. The girls, still riding their sugar high, could be heard giggling in their bedrooms from all the way up the stairs. From time to time, my wife and I could hear one of them shush the other, claiming she'd heard hoofs on the roof or bells jingling. Eventually, our kiddos dozed off. My wife kissed me on the cheek and headed to bed, while I turned off all the lights. I retrieved the costume and tiptoed to the living room, getting ready for my big feature film debut. I did everything you would expect Santa to do. I ate most of the cookies, I drank the milk, I pet my large stomach and said ho ho ho, and I dropped a few presents by the fireplace, all in view of the camera. A pretty good acting job, if I do say so myself. On Christmas morning, the girls came running into our bedroom to wake us up. They excitedly insisted we watch the video before opening the presents. I transferred the footage to my laptop, forwarded to where Santa showed up, and pressed play. My girls squealed with delight and jumped in front of the screen, frantically waving at Santa while obscuring the video from my view. It brought me so much joy to see how happy the girls were. I was too lazy to stop the video, so it continued to play in the background while we unwrapped our gifts. I spotted a box I had not seen the night before. It was small and wrapped in a blue foil paper I didn't recognize. My name was on it, but my wife seemed as surprised as I was to see it there. Noticing my confusion, my youngest daughter spoke. "Daddy, that's gotta be from Mr. Elf," she said, her voice cheerful and bright. I was ready to dismiss her elf comment as just another weird thing kids say, but my wife wasn't so quick to ignore it. "Honey, what elf?" she asked. My daughter pointed to the laptop. By then, the video had ended, and all that was left on the screen was a preview of the first frame. "The one that came with Santa," she answered. Panic struck me like a bird in a jet propeller. I know my wife didn't dress up as an elf. I scanned the video, clicking forward and back until I saw what my daughter had seen. There was someone in the living room. He walked into the corner after I had turned the lights off. He stood there, watching me parading around as Santa. The video went completely quiet after that. It was as though the camera failed to record a single sound. The strange, tall man in an elf costume stood perfectly still for over an hour, watching the camera from a distance. After a while, he walked over to the plate of cookies and bit the head off a gingerbread man. I glanced at the plate and saw his teeth mark on the decapitated cookie. The man then quietly approached the Christmas tree. I thought the audio wasn't working, but as he reached the tree, I began hearing his slow and steady breaths. He reached towards the ornament, and the video stopped. In a terrified frenzy, I grabbed the blue box he'd left behind. I ripped the bow off it and tossed the filthy thing away. I frantically removed the wrapping paper, opened the box, and looked inside. There, on a bed of bubble wrap, was the battery I'd put in the camera the night before. My wife took the ornament and opened the back. The battery was missing. I don't know what scares me more. What the camera caught, or what the elf might have done after he turned off the camera. Number 3. This happened about 4 years ago. At the time, I was around 8 months pregnant and was doing some Christmas shopping at the local mall. It was around 9 at night. I finished up my shopping and headed out of the mall towards my truck. At this mall, there's a road that goes around the mall and parking is on the other side of this road. Therefore, you have to cross the road to get to the parking area. As I'm leaving the store, I happened to notice a man standing in the middle of the road. He looked in my direction and made eye contact. I looked away and kept going. At the time, there are 2 other men that walked past him to go into the mall. He never looks at them or says anything to them, but he kept his eyes on me. I noticed that he started to walk in my direction, but I just kept on strolling to my vehicle. Then I hear,
"Excuse me, can you help me?"
Being Southern has its downfalls, and one of those is having it ingrained into you to be polite. I simply asked, "What do you need?" He looked around and said,
"Could you help me start my car? I think my battery's dead."
I may be Southern, but I'm not that polite, nor am I stupid. Please remember that I'm very much pregnant and a woman walking alone in a parking lot. If he was really having car trouble, is it really likely that he would ask a pregnant woman for help rather than 2 men that had just walked past him? Doubtful. At this point, I know it's time to go, so I just said, "Sorry, I can't help." I keep on walking, a little faster this time. I still see him out of the corner of my eye, following me. I have my keys out and I'm ready to go as soon as I make it to the truck. He's still coming.
"You really aren't gonna help me? I just need a jump."
Again, I say, "Nope, sorry." Finally, I get to the truck, unlock it, and jump in. He's practically running towards me now. I lock the doors and try to get the key in the ignition, but I was shaking, and at that moment the damn key just would not fit into the ignition. He gets to the truck and hits my window saying,
"I just need your help for a minute."
Now I'm starting to get angry and yell, "No, get the hell away from me." He grabs the door handle and tries to open my door and screams,
"Just open the door."
I have my concealed carry license because there have been other reasons that I needed protection that I won't go into here. However, I did have a .38 special in my console that I know how to use. When he tried to open my door, my only thought was to protect my child and myself. I rolled the window down, grabbed the .38, and pointed it right in his face and said, "I'm not gonna tell you again. Get the fuck away from me." He stood there for a moment in shock, I'm sure. In that moment, time stopped. I didn't know what he would do, but I knew that I was prepared to use this gun if he made any move toward me. He didn't. He didn't say a word. He turned and ran. I know I should have gotten the hell out of Dodge then, but I couldn't. All I could do was just sit there in shock. I was terrified of not only what he may have done to me, had I not felt that something was wrong, but also that I had just threatened to kill someone. Not a situation I ever want to be in again. However, should it happen, I still have that .38, and it's loaded and ready to go. So, man at the mall, I hope we never meet again.